Hi, my name is Ethan Stewart. I am a senior at OSU studying Management Information Systems with a concentration in Information Assurance. Today I'm going to be giving a presentation about secure network design and specifically segmentation and segregation. But I want to preface this presentation by saying that segregation and segmentation is just one cybersecurity tool in a big toolbox. So keep in mind that this is not the only thing you need to be doing to keep your network secure. But with that, I'll continue. The basic concept behind segmentation is avoiding this problem. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. So I'm going to zoom in so that way it's easier to see. Here. But here you see we've got all of these disciplines all precariously placed in one single network. And you can see how that might be dangerous, where if this one network is compromised, then everything's lost. So this is what we're trying to avoid whenever we're segmenting a network. Segregation is pretty simple. It's the concept of just isolating systems from internet access. So if it doesn't need to be connected to the internet to do your job, then don't connect it, is the logic there. So that helps reduce attack surface. The internet is scary. We don't know what's out there. And the less things that you have connected to the internet, the safer it'll be. Segmentation is a little bit more complicated. It refers to breaking down a network into basically smaller networks. So I've got a couple images that will help kind of explain that. First one here is a great illustration. So the idea behind segmentation is to kind of create a nesting doll of security around your most valuable assets. So here we have the surface firewall, where if bad guys come from the internet, this is what they're hitting first. You don't want anything too important to be connected to this surface firewall, because if it's compromised, then those services are compromised. But it allows an area for the bad guy to live in that doesn't compromise your important things. So beyond this surface area firewall, each network, say like you can, for in this example, it's divided by discipline. So we have general, finance, HR, IoT. You can divide it any way you want, but they each have their own individual firewall and protections. And that goes a long way in helping secure your data. So to help understand these concepts, I like to equate cybersecurity concepts to real world physical security concepts. So I whipped up this little illustration that kind of gets the point across pretty well, I think. So let's say everything outside the house is the internet. It's scary, like I said, we don't know what's out there. That's where the bad guys live. So this front door would be that surface firewall that I was talking about. That is the first thing they hit. And if it gets compromised, then they have an area to live in that your intrusion detection will isolate from everything else and hopefully catch what's going on before any damage is caused. If you wanted to take this further and segment the network further, one thing you could do is, let me go back to the previous image. One thing you could do would be, so these are finance servers, so maybe these are set up in blocks, right? Maybe each block of a finance server has its own firewall. Maybe each HR server block has its own firewall. And you can go crazy with it and, say each individual server has their own firewall on top of the group of server group firewall. Sorry. So you can see how you can kind of go down the rabbit hole of security and just make it as safe as you possibly can. But the trade-off is that's super expensive. So, but to illustrate that in the physical security example, you would, the server group could be essentially like the sauna in the bathroom, where they got through the first firewall, the surface firewall, like we talked about, but then they also have to penetrate the HR firewall here. And then in addition to that, they also have to get through the HR server group firewall. And cyber criminals like low-hanging fruit. And if you make it complicated enough that it's just a lot of work to get through, then that'll ward off most bad guys. So that's something to keep in mind whenever you're designing your network. Segmentation is very important, but as with all cybersecurity tools, you have to balance the cost and security. But that, I think, provides a good overview of what segmentation is and why it's important and how powerful it is in protecting your network. So to continue, I just have a couple best practices that apply to segmentation, but also just apply to general cybersecurity. I think they're more just general cybersecurity best practices in my opinion, but I'm going to go over them nonetheless. Principle of least privilege. Do not assign admin rights to everybody. Only assign privileges that are needed for their job. You don't want, if somebody has a special situation where they need to access other resources, then they can go through the proper channels to get that access, or somebody else can get that information for them. It's just a little reckless to kind of give people blanket rights for things. So earlier in the previous slide, I mentioned that you can kind of separate the networks however you want, but the best way to segment the networks is how important they are to business operations. So kind of like I described, you want that nesting doll effect of security. You want your most valuable assets to have the most protection and just kind of layer it out depending on its importance to the business. And a third best practice that is important is establish a list of what normal traffic looks like for every network. So HR has its list of what HR traffic looks like. Finance has its list of what finance traffic looks like. And, if one of those ducks is out of a row, it'd be easier to look at a big traffic list for both a human or an automated intrusion detection software, to look at a traffic list and see that one of these things isn't supposed to be there. So that goes a long way as well. And a couple more best practices. Content filtering, that's a pretty simple one that is easy to do. Most people have an idea of what websites their employees should be visiting and what websites their employees should be avoiding. So use that information to create a blacklist of websites and reduce your attack surface. It's just, why take on that extra risk? The same concept applies to using network traffic restrictions in places you don't need to send data. Again, most companies know where they're supposed to be sending their data and where they're supposed to be getting it from. So apply restrictions and blacklist things that are, not normal, and whitelist them on a case-by-case basis. And some more best practices. This is just more basic cybersecurity best practices, multi-factor authentication, all that good stuff. As I mentioned at the beginning, segmentation is one tool in a massive toolbox. So make sure that all those other tools aren't just collecting dust and they're getting used. And just a couple things to keep in mind going forward. No network is impenetrable. There are only networks that have been compromised and will be compromised. So just do what you can. And kind of to that point, security is an active process. You constantly monitor your security systems and staff and follow your procedures. You don't just set up your network one day and then call it. So network segmentation, as I said, is just one tool in a massive toolbox. And I hope everyone has a clear understanding of what it is and has a good day or night, depending on when you're watching this. Take care.